That's nasty.
Welcome back, guys. It's your boy, Chuck Nasty, here on Fantasy Football. We're going to go over some stuff for Week 12. First of all, I apologize for the delay in getting this video out to you. It is a little later than normal on Thursdays. I got caught at work today for like 12 or 13 hours. It has been a long day, but I wanted to make sure you guys have the content you need. So the Thursday night game has already started. I don't know what the score is yet. Don't tell me. I just hope Naheem Hines has already scored a touchdown for me in PPR. But we're going to go over some start-sits for the week based on matchups. Hopefully that'll help you guys with any specific lineup questions you have. If you have something that I don't mention in the start-sits today, just drop a question down in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out. And then make sure you hit that subscribe button or ring the bell. You get notified anytime I drop a video that might help you win your league or at least give you some advantage over your competitor. And at the end of the day, we're all here to prosper and make money together. None of you guys are in my league, hopefully, or any of my leagues, any of my 8 leagues. So I'm okay with giving out some advice that helps you guys win some money as well. Let's get right into it. Starting at the quarterback position this week, I'm starting Baker Mayfield. You heard that right. Not Baker Mayday like he's been the entire first half of the season, but Baker Mayfield, who has a sweet matchup against the Miami Dolphins this week. You know how I feel about the Miami Dolphins, and pretty much anybody who plays them rises to the top of my rankings. But the best part is they're giving up the 27th most points allowed to the quarterback position, meaning there's only 5 teams behind them that are worse. Baker has scored 19.7 points per game in the last 2 weeks average and has thrown 2 passing touchdowns in each of those as well. You remember my recommendation to start Josh Allen last week? Well, he put up 33.8 fantasy points against the Dolphins. So fresh off a week of getting beat up by Josh Allen, let's make it 2 and throw Baker Mayfield in there. I'm starting him this week. I'm also starting Nick Foles against the Tennessee Titans on the road, who are 21st in fantasy points allowed at the quarterback position. He came back last week for the first time. I wish I would have started him, but he threw for 296 yards and 2 touchdowns against a pretty good Colts defense. Would think that the Titans are not going to be as stout as the Colts have been, but it seems like they haven't had a good past couple of weeks. So they gave up 446 yards and 3 passing touchdowns to Patrick Mahomes, and then 232 passing yards and 2 touchdowns to Kyle Allen, and then 301 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jameis Winston. So you know who's doing it this week. It's Nick Foles, baby. Fire him up. I'm also starting Matt Ryan against Tampa Bay. Now, I told you guys I wasn't going to do obvious picks for start and sit, right? I want you to have the guys that you're kind of on the bubble with or guys that have good matchups. But there are some in here that are a little bit more obvious, hence Matt Ryan against Tampa Bay, who are 32nd ranked in fantasy points allowed at the quarterback position. But the difference is that Matt Ryan hasn't had a great couple of weeks, and even though they blew out the Panthers last week, they didn't need him to throw the ball to win that game. So, from coming back after the bye week, he hasn't had to do anything yet, but he gets the 32nd ranked Tampa Bay Buccaneers in points allowed to the quarterback position. And since week 7, when the Buccaneers were on bye, they have allowed 26.8 fantasy points to the quarterback position. I'm expecting Matt Ryan does something similar this week at home. I'm also starting Sam Darnold against Oakland. If you look at the news, if you talk to a friend, most people are going to tell you, man, Sam Darnold, if you see what he did at the beginning of the season, I ain't starting that guy. Well, I'm here to tell you that you need to start him. He's put up 24 or more fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, and Oakland has given up an average of 32.4 fantasy points to the quarterback position in 3 of the last 5 matchups. So I like my chances this week of starting Sam Darnold against Oakland. I am sitting quarterbacks that I do not want to play this week at all. Daniel Jones on the road against Chicago, who are 9th in fantasy points allowed at the quarterback position. Yeah, he's had 28 or more fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games. That's great. But Chicago just gave up 6.2 points to Jared Goff on that game that we all wasted our time watching. 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. I'll pass. I'm not signing up for this one. I don't want anything to do with it. Over the last 3 weeks, the quarterbacks playing against the Bears have 3 touchdowns and 3 picks. Don't even do it. Don't do it. I'm also sitting Jimmy Garoppolo against Green Bay, who are 11th in fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. I streamed Jimmy G last week because he was one of my starts. And it paid off because anytime this man plays against Arizona, he just has a killer week. So that's the only time you really need to start him, apparently. He had 31.6 points this past week and 28.8 points the first time he played the Cardinals. Well, I got bad news for you, okay? He ain't playing the Cardinals this week, and the other 2 matchups of the last 4 weeks, he's put up 11 points in fantasy, and he's also had a 14-point week. Well, I expect my quarterback to do better than that. And the Packers are holding opposing quarterbacks to 13 or less fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. They're fresh off a bye this week, and I'm looking for them to get after the quarterback. I'm not starting Jimmy G this week. But some starts at the running back position. Bo Scarborough, baby, against the Washington Redskins, who are 28th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. I'm proud of Bo, man. He had his first NFL touchdown last week, had 11 more carriers than whichever other running back you want to mention in this backfield. J.D. McKissick, Ty Johnson, Trey Carson. It doesn't matter. Whoever else is back there, he had 11 more touches then. So it's pretty clear that as he was being productive, they're going to continue to give him the rock. But the last 3 matchups for the Redskins on the other side of the ball has given up 21 or more fantasy points to opposing running backs. And I want my boy Bo to get his slice of that this week. So I'm starting him. I am also starting Tevin Coleman against the 23rd ranked Green Bay Packers run defense. Now, this one you might be a little more hesitant on, right? Tevin scored below double-digit fantasy points in the last two of the last 3 weeks, but the Packers are officially butt cheeks against the run. You heard it here first. That's not a metric, but they've given up 30 fantasy points and 3 touchdowns to opposing running backs in the past 2 weeks. Butt cheeks. Tevin Coleman, do your thing, baby. I'm plugging you in. I am also starting Jalen Samuels against Cincinnati, who is 29th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Have you watched any of these Bengals games this year? Because they are ass. And they might be one of the only teams to go 0-16 in maybe consecutive years. I don't know that they can fix this, but they're obviously going for a number 1 overall draft pick. Here's the scoop. James Conner has entered games, and James Conner has left games in consecutive weeks. I don't know exactly the logic behind starting a running back who has a shoulder injury, who's going to get hit in the shoulder, but for whatever reason, they decide to do it anyway. So even if James Conner starts this week, I'm firing up Jalen Samuels. He's had 9 receptions in 2 of the last 3 games, and both of the primary targets in Pittsburgh, Juju and bleed from his ears, Johnson, a.k.a. Deontay Johnson, if you saw that concussion hit, absolutely fucking brutal. Bleeding from his ears and everything, left the game. I can't imagine he starts this week after a hit like that. 2 primary receivers are out, which makes Vance McDonald look pretty good, and it makes Jalen Samuels get a couple more receptions, baby. So I've got him at 8th overall this week as a running back in PPR formats. I highly suggest starting him this week. But some guys that I'm sitting at the running back position, Brian Hill. He had his chance to conquer last week and to assume the role of the starter, to be a consistent piece that we all need. And he let me down. Not only did he have 4.8 fantasy points last week, but he had a touchdown called back as well. If you watch the game, his performance was overall average at best. And he's playing against the number 1 ranked run defense in the league right now, which is Tampa Bay. So if there is a team that you have to throw on to beat, that's the team. That's why I said you start Matt Ryan earlier. So watch Matt Ryan have a day. Watch Brian Hill not do ish, okay? I'm also sitting Joe Mixon against Pittsburgh, who is 6th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. In the last 3 weeks have been pretty legit for Joe Mixon, right? Before that, you were probably considering dropping him, or if he wasn't even worth anything. I know a couple of my buddies actually did drop him. But he's had 17.7, 19.1, and 17.3 fantasy points in PPR formats the last 3 weeks. Well, the first time he played the Steelers, only had 10 fantasy points. And since then, they've acquired Minkah Fitzpatrick, who has made their defense on another level. I don't want anything to do with Joe Mixon this week. I'm sitting him on the bench. But a couple of starts at the wide receiver position for you. I am starting Jamison Crowder against Oakland, who is 27th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. In 3 back-to-back weeks, Jamison Crowder has been slaying. The man is a PPR legend. 22.3, 19.1, and 18.6 in PPR formats. He is and always will be a legend. He did the same thing when he was in Washington a couple years ago. But the Raiders have given up 104 plus receiving yards and 4 touchdowns to 4 different receivers in the last 4 weeks. If I had to guess which of these Jets receivers is going to go off this week, my money is on Jamison Crowder. So start him up this week. I'm also starting James Washington against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are 23rd in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. He's played a bit better, but like we talked about before, both of the other targets that were primary options for Mason Rudolph in this offense are likely going to be missing this game. And he's had 13 receptions for 208 yards and a touchdown on 16 targets in the last 3 games. I expect that number to go up, but he also has a really good matchup this week. So there's a pretty good chance that playing him is going to yield you some fantasy points this week. Fire him up. I am also starting Deebo Samuel against the Green Bay Packers, who are 17th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. 111 receiving yards or more in both of his last 2 games and 20.3 fantasy points since week 9. What is Deebo on? The Packers are giving up 115 passing yards to the leading wide receiver in the last 2 games. If Emmanuel Sanders sits, which he might well since he's pretty banged up from last week, guess who would be the leading wide receiver in San Fran? Well, it ain't going to be Ross Dwelly, let's put it that way. Fire up Deebo Samuel this week. I am also starting Calvin Ridley, wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, who plays against the 32nd ranked Tampa Bay defense. How many different parts of this defense can be ranked 32nd? I don't know, but it's bad. 30.3 fantasy points last week. If you fired Calvin Ridley up, you are very happy with that. There's a good chance he was sitting on your bench because he hasn't done anything like that all year. But he's finally got his opportunity to step up. There's no Austin Hooper. Mohamed Sanu is gone, and the world is his oyster. No one gives up more fantasy points to the wide receiver than Tampa Bay. Start him this week. I'm also starting Josh Gordon against the 25th ranked Philadelphia Eagles. Tyler Lockett's still out, and someone's got to stand on that line of scrimmage opposite DK Metcalf. He's the man for the job. First game as a Seahawk, he comes in and they trusted him with 2 of the most important third downs on the game-winning drive that allowed them to win that game against San Fran. Well, guess who's going to have the most fantasy points? Or 7th most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. You guessed it. Philadelphia. They're hard to run against, but they can definitely be thrown on. So look for Josh Gordon to get some points this week. But a couple of wide receivers I'm sitting this week. I'm sitting Michael Gallup against the New England Patriots, who are 1st in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. He had 148 yards or a touchdown in 3 straight games. The man is popping off. But I think it's going to come to a screeching halt this week. The Patriots are really good at taking away the number 1 option on the opposing team. They want to make you beat them with your number 2 or your number 3 option. Well, the problem is that it would actually be worse for Michael Gallup if Amari Cooper did not play in this game. And there's a decent chance that happens. So I would rather trust Randall Cobb over Michael Gallup this week if there's no Amari Cooper in this lineup. But nobody gives up less points to the wide receiver position than New England, and I'm sitting Michael Gallup this week. I'm also sitting Darius Slayton against Chicago, who was 5th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. He's been legit, but it's been pretty boom or bust. I mean, the man's inconsistent, to say the least. He's had 4 touchdowns in 3 games, but 4.2 fantasy points total in 3 of the last 5. The Bears have given up 2 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers all year through 12 weeks. I think I'd probably prefer playing Golden Tate in the slot if I had to play somebody against this defense. I don't want anything to do with Darius Slayton this week. I am also sitting John Brown against Denver, who's 4th in fantasy points allowed at the wide receiver position. He crushed it last week. I actually smoked one of my homies with John Brown in the flex spot. It was great. But you know how I feel against Chris Harris Jr. and my Denver Broncos. And it's not a homer ranking, okay? I'm giving you this advice because while the entire Denver Broncos team consistently loses in the run game, our quarterback sucks, the only thing we have is a pass rush and a secondary, I'm going to tell you that the pass is the only thing they can defend against. So don't start John Brown this week against the 4th-ranked Denver Broncos. I am starting a couple of tight ends this week. Ryan Griffin against the Oakland Raiders, who are 30th in fantasy points allowed at the tight end position. 23.9 fantasy points last week in PPR, and the Raiders are giving up almost the third most receiving touchdowns to the tight end option. If you need to stream the position, I would probably look to Ryan Griffin as an option, as he's owned in just 34% of leagues on Yahoo, which is up 31% this week. So prior to this big show-out week, he was only owned in 3% of leagues. I'm also starting Dallas Goedert against Seattle, who was 24th in fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Seattle's had trouble covering the tight end this year, but Goedert has scored 11 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. Alshon might be ruled out this week, and Nelson Aguilar couldn't catch a cold. So who's going to be a better number 2 option? Probably Dallas Goedert. A couple of tight ends I'm sitting this week. I'm sitting Ross Dwelley, tight end for the San Francisco 49ers, who plays against the 27th ranked Green Bay Packers. If you're going to tell me that he scored 2 touchdowns last week, that's the reason why I should play him, I'm going to tell you to F off, because he's had only 14 yards to go with that, and he had 4 targets total. So if this man doesn't score a touchdown, he's busting, and I think that he might bust this week against Green Bay, so I'm going to pass. I am also sitting Noah Fant against Buffalo, who's 4th in fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. In the 2 past games, he's had 14 targets. He's only caught 7 of those 14 targets, which is 50% for those of you that need a little help with the math. But I don't know if it's totally his problem or if it's the fact that maybe Brandon Allen is having trouble getting him the ball or giving him a halfway decent ball to catch. So the Bills are top-notch at covering the tight end, and I'm not confident in what the Broncos have going on. I think that it's just not a good idea, okay? Because there's only one tight end that has scored a double-digit fantasy week against the Buffalo Bills D, and it's not going to be 2 after this week. So sit Noah Fant this week. But before we get back to the football, to go watch the game, to root on our teams, I wish you guys the best of luck in fantasy this year. In the playoffs, we're approaching them pretty quickly. Hopefully you have the Eagles defense and a couple other teams that I have given you a couple weeks ago to prepare yourself. But real quick, let's do the picks for the week. This game has already started. Like I said, I don't know what the score is. I haven't looked yet because I'm creating content to help you guys with your fantasy league. It's crazy. I should be drinking a 3-finger scotch right now watching the football game on a Thursday night. I have Houston winning tonight against Indy. I have Cleveland winning at home against Miami. I have Detroit winning, even with Jeff Driscoll at quarterback against Washington. Denver. We're going to switch that right now. I do not have Denver. I have Buffalo winning at the home against Denver. I have Atlanta winning at the home against Tampa Bay. I have Seattle winning on the road against the Eagles. New Orleans at home against Carolina. Pittsburgh on the road against Cincy. Oakland on the road against the Jets. Chicago at home against the Giants. The Titans at home against Foles and the Jags. New England at home against Dallas. San Fran at home against Green Bay. And Baltimore on Monday night against the Rams. I might change the Tennessee-Jacksonville one. I'm kind of leaning Jacksonville, but not sure yet. The Titans are a little banged up too. We'll see what the scoop is. So that's what we've got. Good luck this week. As always, subscribe to the channel, support your boy. We're on the road to 300 subs, so I can continue making content to help you guys win your leagues. Good luck this week. We'll see you on Tuesday.